Hi, my name's Michael. Welcome to my new channel, Masonic Mysteries. In this channel, I'll be talking about my experiences, beliefs, and ideas around Freemasonry and related topics. I want to start with a strong disclaimer. I'm only talking for myself about my own experiences, my own beliefs and views. I'm in no way here as a representative of any Masonic organisation or body, and nothing that I say should ever be quoted or used as though it was. It isn't, it's just my own personal experiences and views. So, with that said, I suppose I should also add that I'm not speaking for Freemasonry, but I am speaking as a Mason. I am a practicing Freemason, involved in a number of Masonic orders, fairly experienced. There are much more senior and much more experienced and influential Masons than me, but I'm not entirely a new boy either. I do have some experience of the things that I'm talking about. Okay, so now I want to leap in and just get on with the first video. It may even be the last, because I think this is probably actually going to cover the most important things that I think I really have to say about Masonry. So I've been umming and ahhing about making a video like this, for making my channel. I created the channel but uploaded nothing for about a year. I've only just been inspired to actually get down and try and make this video by a video from a guy called John St. Julian Baba Wanyama. His last name I find difficult to pronounce properly. I'm not sure quite how it's pronounced, but anyway, so I'll just call him John St. Julian Baba for now. So John St. Julian Baba espouses a belief system that is very much grounded in Christian Gnosticism. So the central idea of Christian Gnosticism is that the world that we in, or at least the variant, because Gnosticism actually covers quite a lot of different belief systems, but there's certainly one that's come to the fore today. I don't even personally regard it as truly Gnostic. The word Gnostic is referring to knowledge. It's the knowledge of direct experience. So at the heart of Gnosticism, to me, there is a mystical experience, the experience of union with God, or of the revelation of the divine within. It's not at the heart of true Gnosticism is not a belief system, but is a raw experience, a raw mystical experience. And a lot of people who call themselves Gnostics are perhaps they are less concerned with this revelatory experience, this inner knowing, and they're more concerned with a sort of structured belief system. And in the most common variant of this structured belief system, the world that as we generally experience is this three-dimensional world of our everyday experience, where we experience the world as three-dimensional and ourselves as a being, basically a three-dimensional body that thinks and talks in that three-dimensional world, that this is an illusory or fallen world, that it's not the creation of the true God, it's the creation of it's called the demiurge, right? It's a false god. It essentially, you could think of it as being Satan and his angels, and Satan's created this fallen false reality and ensnared us in it. But they don't often talk about Satan, they talk about the demiurge. Under the demiurge, the sort of satanic angels are the archons, and then under that there are various sort of assistants and things. Now, the Christian element comes in with the idea that Jesus is a manifestation of the true God, or our connection to the true God. The Christ nature is essentially our true nature. that we are co-creators with God, that we are God's children, we are like God, we are linked and bound to God, and we have the creative power. God has endued us with the same creative power, and we are actually higher dimensional beings who are co-creators of the universe, but we have given ourselves over or been taken over by the demiurge, and we have lost that understanding of who and what we are. And the Christian salvation on this view is re-establishing that connection, and this is where the Gnostic bit really comes in, because this would be actually experiencing this, knowing this, not as an intellectual idea, but actually having a direct first-person experience of the Christ within. Okay. So, John St. Julian Baba mixes in a lot of sort of matrix types ideas. So the way the archons ensnare us is by programming us with kind of like a virus, implanting programs into us that enslave us. He also brings in ideas very similar to David Icke's, where some of the agents of this sort of conspiracy of evil, this multi-dimensional extraterrestrial or supraterrestrial conspiracy that imprisons and controls us, that their main agents on this planet are reptilian entities that are multi-dimensional creatures that can masquerade as human beings, and that are deeply implicated in the structures of power and control in our society. Okay, so how do these things, if we're these co-creators with God, these incredibly powerful beings, right, these multi-dimensional beings, how do they get us to conceive of ourselves as being these limited beings and give over our creative powers to them and let them use our creative powers to imprison us in a world? Well, they do it by implanting these programs, according to John St. Julian, right? And how do they get us to take that? Well, this is where the video kind of that I was watching really inspired me to get this, because what John St. Julian Baba said about this is, he says, look, if you want to poison somebody, you don't give them a big mug of poison, because most poisons are completely unpalatable. They look toxic. People would see them, recognise them for what they were, and they would refuse to take them. So what you have to do is to find a small amount of poison, a very effective poison that can actually kill somebody with a very small amount of it, and then you hide it in some really good, tasty, nutritious, attractive food. And you give them the good, tasty, attractive food, and they eat it, and they don't realise that there's a poison in it. It's very much like the way that you give somebody a virus, because he uses this computer analogy. So if you want to put a virus on someone's computer, you don't give them a little USB stick with a skull and crossbones on it and a labelled virus, right? Deadly virus. No, please put that in your laptop, will you? The answer, of course, is no. Right? Unless they're really silly and you can convince them, oh, don't worry, it's just a joke. Right? The way that you do it is that you offer them a program that they will actually want. You might say, well, look, I've got a crap copy of Photoshop. You can have that, put that on your computer. You can have 400 quid's worth of software for nothing, and your photography will be brilliant, you know? And that then becomes tempting, and you just don't know that there's a bit of malware in it that will help them then hack your bank account and whatever, right? Now, this really rang true to me. And it's something that I think a lot of people don't really appreciate. I mean, I know that for a lot of people, when you hear ideas like John St. Julian Baba's, but especially the related ideas that are very similar of David Icke, the instant reaction of most people is just, well, that's all absurd. And it's the same with because QAnon stuff is really related to this. there's a very wide variance of belief in this, right? But this idea that we are more powerful than we realise, that we are either creators like God or co-creators with God, and that we have become ensnared in something that deceives us about our true nature. This is a very there are lots of different flavours of this that go around. At the one extreme, you've got somebody like Dolores Cannon, who sort of channels stuff, and she talks about awakening to a higher dimensional reality. But in hers, she doesn't place a lot of emphasis on sinister forces keeping us away from it. It's more like a growth process. At the other end, you have somebody like David Icke, who very much sees it as we have been imprisoned. We've been imprisoned by malevolent forces. You have to actually fight those malevolent forces to free yourself. Both these ideas that we are these multidimensional powerful beings, and that we have been deprived of our birthright by some sort of malicious, conspiratorial network of evil. Both these ideas are quite prevalent, and they often come together, and they are very much at the heart of the whole QAnon the whole QAnon thing. So they connect up to Trumpism. To some extent, they even connect to things like Brexit. Not in a very obvious way, because a lot of people don't know these are bubbling away below the surface, but they are there. Now, I think that understanding it in the terms that John St. Julian Bubba talks about is quite powerful, because it helps you to understand it in rather a different way. There's a very close parallel. I'm going to bring it out. I'm not just going to say there is, but I'm going to bring out what it is. But there is quite a close parallel between a lot of these ideas and the occult ideas around Hitler and Himmler, and particularly around the Thule Society and to some extent the Volt movement in Nazi Germany. Which you can trace a lot of this back to Wagner, and so you've got the kind of, so a lot of people sort of think of Hitler as sort of standing up and saying, basically, Jews have ruined your life. It's the Jews' fault. Let's kill them, and everyone going, yeah, brilliant, we'll do that. Let's set up some gas chambers. And it wasn't at all like that. Hitler did not stand up and start talking about hatred of Jews and other groups. Hitler actually stood up at the beginning. The meat in his message, the meal, right, the good bit, the Photoshop, the program you want, was that he got up and said, "You are German. And being German, your destiny is great. Germans are great people. You once we were proud. We defeated Rome. We were vibrant. We were full of energy. We were a dynamic force in the world, and we were destined to be great. And you are part of that. And because of that, I love you. I care about you. I see your suffering." Right? And I care about you, and I care about your greatness, and I want to help you retrieve your greatness. That was the positive food. And actually, Hitler did an awful lot more of that than he did talking about Jews. But then comes the poison, and the poison is, and the thing that's deprived you of your greatness and led to your downfall are the Jews, a Jewish conspiracy of Jews and bankers and Freemasons. Right? They have disempowered you. They have given you a slave religion. Christianity it was, on his view, a slave religion. They have programmed you as slaves, and they have disempowered you, and they have corrupted your blood. So even right down on a biological, on the most fundamental level, they have corrupted you and deprived you of your greatness. And I want to help you get it back. And the idea that the way you got it back ultimately was by exterminating not just Jews, but Jews, Freemasons, the disabled, gypsies, Slavs. There were actually 12 million people killed in the Holocaust, not 6, or around 12 million. We don't know the exact numbers because they didn't always bother keeping meticulous records as they slaughtered Slavs. Right? Now, what I want to suggest there is that this message about the Jews being the author, this Jewish conspiracy being the author of the downfall of the Germans, was actually ultimately an incredibly disempowering message. It actually, although the message, the ostensive message given to the German people was, you are a great people who have been brought down by a vile and corrupt cabal of bankers and Jews and Freemasons and, communists, right? The way that it construed them as victims and got them focused on defeating the Jews very much led, and the Freemasons, and very much led to their downfall, because they had to put an awful lot of resources into the Holocaust. And this massive industry of slaughter was doing absolutely nothing to improve the situation of the German people. Right? And ultimately led to their downfall. Had they not carried out the Holocaust, it is entirely possible that they would have won the Second World War. To start with, they may not have experienced quite the level of opposition from some sources that they experienced. The Holocaust was incredibly destructive. It was incredibly destructive, obviously, for the groups that they targeted. I don't want to just say the Jews, because this is a form of Holocaust denial. When people just talk about the Jews, there were 6 million Jews. I'm not denying that at all. But there were a lot of other people who also got caught up in it. Some communities, such as some of the Romani communities, were decimated to an even greater extent. Although they weren't numerically as big as the Jewish communities, they were decimated to an even greater extent. Some communities just completely wiped off the face of the earth. Right. So they may not have had as much opposition. So actually, the message about the Jewish conspiracy, and that as the explanation for why the German people lost their greatness, actually turned out to be the poison, and not just in the sense that it dragged them into the Holocaust, but in the sense that the Holocaust very much dragged them down and destroyed every positive aspect of their ambitions. And there were positive aspects to their ambitions, and national socialism that we now see as a doctrine of hatred, or we don't all, actually, it's growing, because there is a really substantial element in it that is actually a doctrine of mutual support and togetherness, but around the national identity that doesn't extend to other groups. That's why it's national socialism rather than some sort of international socialism. So we see very much the same thing in David Icke. David Icke replaces the Jews and bankers with the reptilians, and again the Masons are their agents in the world, the agency through which they recruit members and that they use to manipulate politics and to keep people in ignorance. And similar ideas feature in QAnon. And I'm going to be arguing that this is really the toxin um, that is not infesting every area of and every sort of every kind of every thinker or group that believe in the awakening and the idea that we are higher dimensional beings who are really powerful and that we're in a process of rediscovering our true nature, but that it permeates that whole scene, being focused much more intensely in certain parts of it than others. Okay. So this is a channel about Masonic mysteries. So the question is, where does Freemasonry really fit in all of this? How does Freemasonry relate to it? So there is an idea that's quite common amongst people, amongst the people who originated a lot of this stuff, that the knowledge about this sort of higher dimensional reality and our true nature is something that was once possessed by Freemasons, and that Freemasons were once the good guys, and that they existed to as a school to teach this stuff, right? But that somewhere down the line, the vast majority of Freemasons lost the knowledge, whilst a small cabal seized that knowledge, and instead of trying to help teach the world about it in a progressive way and guide the world to a richer, better future, they started trying to exploit it for their own personal gain, and they made connections with, or were inspired to do this by, some sort of satanic or XET agency, malevolent agency, like Julian Simbaba's hierarchy of evil entities headed by the demiurge, right? So we end up with a very funny situation where quite often people who are trying to convince you that they know all about this stuff will tell you that what they're giving you are Masonic secrets, right? And they will be telling you, look, the Masons don't know anymore, or if they do, they're not telling you, right? And they want to keep you hidden, they want to keep you in slavery. But I happen to know, and I'm not saying me, but they say, I know the true secrets of Masonry, and I want to share them with you. So they are doing this funny thing of simultaneously claiming a kind of Masonic authority, that they know the secrets of Masonry, while at the same time saying, but the people who now call themselves Masons, the Freemasons as an organisation, no, they don't know this stuff. Yeah, they've lost it, or they're misusing it and they're corrupted. So but it's worth questioning, is there anything credible about the idea that this kind of knowledge, the positive idea that we are co-creators with God, and that we are multi-dimensional beings, and that we can awaken to a sort of higher order reality? Is there any credibility in the idea that this is something that Masons at least once knew? Well, I think the answer to that, without going into Masonic ritual, because this is not an expose channel, is quite clearly yes, that is potentially credible, and I'm going to try and talk about it in a way that doesn't violate any of my obligations to not put our mysteries on public display. That might be indicative to a Mason, a practicing Mason, of which areas of our ritual they might want to look at and think about to recognize it, and give some confirming evidence to that. So it's public knowledge that, and by the way, you can actually check most of our rituals, because the ritual books are on sale. There's only certain words that are missing. I don't recommend buying them. I don't think that's an appropriate way to find out about Masonic mysteries unless you actually are a Mason taking the degrees. But that's not so much to keep the secrets from you, that's more because there's a right way to go about learning the real teachings of Masonry, and there's a wrong way to go about it. And buying the ritual books and reading them won't really do it. It'll give you part of it, but it won't. The actual experience of being in a lodge, of having to get on with other Masons and things like that, are all integral parts of how the real training of a Mason works. But you can find out most of that stuff. But I still wouldn't feel right just sort of laying it out, because we are supposed to keep it confidential. Anyway, so the bits that are publicly very accessible, one is that we have that a major origin of Freemasonry are the original craft or operative Freemasons who built churches and temples, quite literally actually built them, and that it's not just about the craft of stonework, that it was as much about architecture and the architects and the designing of the temples and the churches as it was about the actual crafting of a piece of stone, and that it's very much the symbolism from architecture and stuff that's gone into our ritual. Now, when an architect's designing a building, one of the core skills that they need is geometry, an understanding of geometry. And the symbols that everybody recognises from Freemasonry are a square and a compasses. So that's no big disclosure there. Well, those are quite clearly implements for geometrical construction. And there is within that an emphasis on the square. And when you're constructing a geometry, if you think about Euclidean geometry, the way you construct a three-dimensional geometry is by a series of perpendicular lines, right? Lines, adding new lines for each dimension. You add a new line that is square to all the previous lines. In geometry, if you really study geometry now, especially if you go on to higher dimensional Euclidean geometry or non-Euclidean geometries, a very central idea in that is an extrapolation from the idea of a square, which is the idea of a orthogonality, which is like a kind of generalization of being at a right angle to higher dimensions. So if you think about the idea of establishing a new dimension in a Euclidean space, it would very much be like the idea of raising a pillar that was square to the level ground already established. So to anybody versed in Masonry, to a Mason, I think that is a big indication of how you could unpick a large part of the significance of our ritual, right? And in terms of this sort of wider debate, this is referencing stuff that is already publicly known that suggests, yes, there is some connection between the teachings that we maintain and transmit in Masonry and this idea of awakening to this co-creating higher dimensional reality of ourselves. What about the idea that Masons have forgotten this? Well, again, some of that is that there is a theme in Masonry about the idea of the loss and rediscovery of secrets. I think this has filtered through into people's awareness and helped contribute to the idea that Masons have lost their secrets and don't have the knowledge. Now, if you were to join a lodge, or if you are a member of a lodge, you would find that the vast majority of Masons probably don't make a great deal of study of geometry don't really think about higher dimensional realities, um, and probably just pretty much take our ritual at face value as just something that is enjoyable to do. Um, Seems quaint and arcane, but probably what most of them attend to are the moral bits of it, about being an upstanding good guy, about contributing the contribution we make to charity, and just the networking and enjoying each other's company. But based on my own experience, I can say, I've already given an indication of part of it, this stuff about geometry, right? But that within the simple moral injunctions about being a good guy, right, there is more to these than might meet the eye, right? And that's really going to feature in that, or that's a really important part of what I'm really talking about and what I'm trying to say. Um, an important part of John St. Julian Baba's idea, and it's kind of there in David Icke as well, is that we actually already are co-creators with God. We are already really powerful. It's that we have given our creative power over to this high controlling, imprisoning hierarchy of evil, and we're allowing them to manipulate us into using our own creative power in order to create a prison world for ourselves. Now, I believe that that is the meat. I believe that that is the good bit of the meal that is being served up to the people who are involved in all these discourses around the awakening, around QAnon and various other things. And I think it is indeed good meat. So the way that I understand the moral teachings in Freemasonry, some people just see it as kind of extolling you to be a good guy. But I look at it another way. If we really are these multidimensional, all-powerful creators, and we have been in some way led to create a prison for ourselves, then the way we extricate ourselves from that prison is not by trying to become co-creators with God, powerful multidimensional beings, because we already are that. What we're having to learn to do is to use the creative power that we already have in a much more liberating way, in a much more constructive way, in one that doesn't build a prison world, does not build an imprisoning reality around us, but builds a heaven, a paradise, an Eden, a garden, a place of love and joy and mutual support and harmony. And where you see most occult groups, for example, a lot of the Rosicrucian groups and things like that, a lot of Kabbalist and magical societies, they're trying to teach their students how to become powerful. But if you're already powerful, that's really a lesson you don't need to learn. If you're already powerful and you're experiencing problems in your life and difficulties and limitations, and you really are living in what you regard as a prison world, you don't get out of it by becoming more powerful. That would be like being in a car that is out of control because you're driving too fast going around bends, and you then try and solve the problem by making your engine, beefing up your engine and driving even faster. No, what you need in that situation is to hone your driving skills, and sometimes that means learning to slow down, right? Not becoming more powerful, but learning to drive better. And that's what the moral instruction in Masonry is doing. It's teaching you, or it's trying to encourage you to learn to use your creative power in a more constructive, a more loving, and a more beneficial way. And when that comes together with beginning to recognize that there is more to your existence and your reality than just this three-dimensional life, then really good things happen. And Freemasonry does not exist to hide this from people. It exists to preserve and transmit the knowledge of it. Right? This is a really big part of the poison in people like David Icke's message. They say that we're all about controlling you, that we're all about stopping you ever getting this knowledge, that we're about keeping you in ignorance and then manipulating you and making you a slave. That is so much not what Masonry is about. It exists to preserve and transmit and communicate these ideas. And it's willing to communicate them. It says, its first thing, who would it communicate to? Now, there are lots of Masons who don't really understand this, and they have got some funny ideas about secrecy and about elitism and stuff like that. But they do not represent Masonry as a whole. If you are sincerely interested in Masonry and you want to become a Mason, and the reason that you want to become a Mason is because you actually believe from your experience that Masonry helps to promote goodness in the world, that it helps men to become better men, to use their creative powers in a more constructive and complete way, then you would be welcomed into Masonry. But there are some people who will not be accepted in, at least not at a particular time. Now, one block is age, but that goes with time anyway. Have to be 21 or 18 on the university scheme. Another block used to be being female, and you still can't join the United Grand Lodge of England run lodge here in the UK. But in Britain and other countries as well, there are feminine Grand Lodges, lodges that women can join. We just don't have mixed lodges. So being a woman is not a bar. There are really only 3 bars to becoming a Mason. So the first is that you have to actually want to. You have to ask. You have to be coming freely. You have to not be being put under pressure. Nobody has to be telling you, oh, you want promotion, you better become a Mason. I'm not saying that this never happens. Right? At one time it probably happened quite a bit, but it's not how it's meant to work. Right? You are meant to be coming freely because you formed a really good impression of what Masons are like and you want to be part of it. The second one, and in some ways the most important, is that you have to believe in a supreme being. And I think that supreme being kind of has to be an intelligent, sentient being capable of acting in the world. We don't check what it is. It doesn't have to be Jesus or God, your supreme being. You could think of the way that you approach the supreme being could be Allah, or it could be, I think the Tao, the Buddha nature would qualify as the supreme being properly, would. Although some Masons wouldn't agree, some think a much more kind of personal God. It could be Brahma, just as long as it's a supreme being. This is not stated, we never really discuss it because religion is left in the hands of the religion that you're a member of. But I think that the easiest belief for a Freemason is that there is just one supreme being, and that different peoples and different cultures have different ways of talking about and understanding that one supreme being. Certainly, I think the idea is that when we acknowledge the supreme being, we are kind of tacitly assuming that there is just the one supreme being, that the fact that people have different names for God doesn't mean that there are different supreme beings out there, and that when you think about the supreme being, you are kind of saying, look, I don't necessarily know exactly what the name of this supreme being is. I don't necessarily know all his characteristics. I might have some false ideas about it, but I'm trying to reference the supreme being, whatever that may be, and not just sort of an idea of a supreme being. You have to believe in a supreme being. And this is kind of the first indication that of why this, or from this comes the first indication of why these bars are there. And one thing I think I can say without giving anything too much away is that it is explained to you at an early point in the ritual that you're asked whether you believe in a supreme being or whether you believe in God, right? And you are told that this was important, that they're glad that you do. If you answer yes, if you answer no, I should think you'd have to leave, right? But if you answer yes, you're told that that's important because you have to trust in God. You need the help of God, the support of guidance of God to pass safely through what's going to come. So if you don't believe in God and you don't trust in God, then you are actually going to be in danger with what follows. It's not spelt out what that danger really is, but that's something I'm going to discuss here, is what I'm getting at in many ways. The other bar, so you have to come freely, you have to believe in God, and the other bar, which has different aspects to it, but they all really come down to the same thing, is that you have to be coming for the right motivation, from the right place, right? You mustn't be coming because you want some kind of personal advantage, because you want advancement, economic benefits, advancement in jobs, political advancement. You mustn't be a criminal, right? Joining a lodge because you want to network with policemen and get their help covering up your crimes and stuff like that. That's all a big no-no. You have to be joining because you genuinely believe that Masonry promotes goodness and you want to be part of promoting the good. Right? Now again, so there are indications that would sort of about that. I mean, you'd be asked about your motivation for joining. You'd also be asked about things like a criminal record. I think sometimes people look at credit records and things like that. But the ultimate aim of the whole thing at your interview, when a decision is being made, is to try to make sure that you are coming because you see Freemasonry as a good and beneficial thing, and you want to be part of promoting the good. Right. Now, if you go back to the idea of co-creator with God, that we are meant to be co-creators with God, that we have this power, and that our problems in life, that the major barriers we face are that that we don't use that power wisely. Right? Now, people like David Icke, Julian Simbaba, blame us not using this power wisely, not recognizing our true nature, on us being misled by this hierarchy of evil. I don't buy into that myself. I think that the reason that we sometimes create hellish existences for ourselves, sometimes ones that are just not very happy, is because we're learning, because we are the children of God. We may be co-creators with God, but we aren't yet equal with God in creative ability, right? We may have the power, but we don't yet have the wisdom to use it wisely. But Masonry is aiming to teach you to use that more wisely, but you're joining together with people who are also interested in enhancing their creative power, shall we say. So if you come in trying to use that power unwisely, and any use other than promoting the good is unwise, because it will ultimately, what stops it being, I mean, what makes the good good, it's not all about sitting in judgment on people. It's not about what we normally think of as morality, as you shouldn't do that, you shouldn't do that. The good is actually about what brings genuine joy, satisfaction, happiness, health and well-being in life, right? So what is not the good doesn't bring about those things. It brings about misery and suffering. It may not do it immediately. Sometimes the reason we need moral laws and codes to guide us at times is because sometimes things actually can look quite attractive and like they are going to be quite good, when actually their overall consequences are going to be quite bad. Right? But the good is literally that. I mean, I don't think it reduces to something else. So I can't. It's not exactly the same as joy or happiness or fulfillment. They're all kind of parts of it, but the good is just the good. The key is recognizing it, and we kind of do. We have an instinct. We do. Most of us recognize the good. Just sometimes we don't pay enough attention to really think it through. But if you're becoming co-creators, you're joining with people. If you join with people and you start using your creative power, abusing it, using it for evil or selfish purposes, you will actually start creating for yourself a kind of hell world. So why don't we want immoral people to come in and learn the teachings, right? Well, first of all, they would corrupt lodges, and this has happened. Once you get one person who's joining a lodge because they want some sort of, they're politically ambitious or they want to exploit Masonry for their own purposes, they tend to bring in other people of a like mind, and eventually you can end up with something like the Italian lodge Propaganda Due that was kicked out of Masonry but continued to exist and became a focus for corruption, crime, and authoritarian politics in Italy, even perhaps implicated in things like political assassination. Right? So one is to protect Masonry itself from being corrupted, or at least from lodges being corrupted. But I think that the deeper reason is that if you become a Mason, if you start learning about your creative power and how to harness it and focus it and use it more effectively, if you start studying that stuff without learning how to use it wisely, to use it to promote, love, compassion, and all the other moral virtues that Masonry espouses, however much harm you might cause to others, you will cause even more to yourself. You will ultimately cause great misery and distress to yourself. So those are the real reasons that Masonry doesn't just shout its teachings from the rooftops to everybody. Very few people couldn't become Masons because very few people are irredeemably corrupt or irredeemably evil or, incapable of believing in some kind of supreme being. I mean, they may have decided they don't, but that's a free choice. So there's a big bit, I think, missing from the co-creator bit, and that's the how we shape reality, how this mysterious power to shape reality works. And I think the clues to that lie in, well, in terms of modern science and quantum mechanics, in the idea of possible worlds. I don't think it's exactly this, because I'm not sure that I believe that the fundamental reality is possible worlds. I think that it might actually be chaos, out of which many different possibilities could be filtered and created, right? But essentially, the way that we co-create with God is by navigation through possible worlds. So I think this is the really big key to what the message that I really want to get across, right? So the question becomes, right, is David Icke's view of Freemasonry correct, or is mine? So what a lot of the people who are like David Icke would say, well, you have your idea of Masonry, you say it's based on experience, right? So you became a Mason, and as you went through Masonry, you saw that there were these great moral teachings, and you unpicked this idea that they're helping you navigate, that they're helping you build, that they're helping you harness your creative power to build a new and better life, and it's all great, and it's a brotherhood of love and light and universal compassion, and that sounds great. But what some of them would say is, look, this is what's really happened, right? All of that's a screen, right? When you signed up, you will have been approached by people who will have asked you various questions, talked to you, and you may not have realized that this was going on because, you made the wrong replies, right? But had you made the right replies, then you would have been recruited into something that lurks behind Masonry, right? If you'd made noises like, "Oh yeah, you can help me out, can you? I could get a better job if I go with you, I could become a politician, could I? That if you'd made all those noises, if you'd indicated that you were looking for sort of corrupt, unfair advantage, if you made noises like you were amenable to networking with criminals and things, then other things would have opened up for you, and you would have discovered that all of that stuff, all these ordinary Masons who go around thinking that Masonry is basically a charitable institution, that it's nice, that it's a brotherhood of light, but that they're all deluded, right? And that they're the screen that the truly deep, satanic, nasty thing lurks behind. And if you'd made the right noises, you would have gradually been initiated into the true satanic Illuminati conspiracy, right? Now, if your consciousness is really hooked into this sort of three-space, everyday experience in which Schrodinger's cat is either alive or dead, then it really has to be one thing or the other, right? Either Masonry really is this sinister conspiracy and I have just not made the right noises to go into it, or that's not really Masonry at all, that doesn't actually happen, the reason I haven't encountered it is because it isn't there. And my version of it is the true version of it. But if the way that co-creation works is that we're navigating through possible worlds, then it may be that there actually is a possible world. This is not an impossible idea, that Masonry has been deeply corrupted, and that if I had made the right noises, I would have found myself gradually being initiated into what I would think of as the shadow of Masonry, not the reality. And that it's not an either-or thing. That as you move through possible worlds, depending on the decisions that you make, the choices that you make, and the way that things work out around you and what you give out into the world, you actually pass into different realities. In that case, joining Freemasonry for the wrong reasons would be authentically dangerous, because it would actually be a doorway into a possible world in which everything really was run by paedophile, murderous, reptilian, criminal conspiracies that you were going to get yourself embroiled in. That is, no kind of universe to be in. But that if you join for the right reasons, you will never make the choices and the decisions that will drag you into what I would call the shadow of Masonry, the dark world, the dark side. Right? The same thing with the reptilians, right? If you go the David Icke way, right, in this quest to become powerful, you start looking for signs of the conspiracy all around you. You start looking at the television, and where I see and a lot of people just see a glitch in the encoding of a digital signal, you see the face of a reptilian breaking through, right? Now you have to ask yourself, right, am I just deluded in thinking that I actually live in a world in which the fall, entering this world, the fall was not actually a terrible sin and an absolutely awful thing, but was a part of our process of becoming? It was like our birth, difficult and traumatic, and it's left us with scars, ideas, guilt about the fall. And that this fallen world is not a prison, it's a place in which we're learning to use our creative powers. And in which, yes, there are oppressive structures and things like that, but these are not the creation of some all-powerful demiurge who is playing with us. They are our own creations, as we have been using our powers in less than ideal ways. And that we don't have to defeat some sort of evil conspiracy in order to free ourselves from what is, in some respects, a prison world, the prison of our past mistakes. The way that we free ourselves from the prison of our past mistakes, because sins are mistakes. The idea of evil turns it into something else, but they are basically mistakes. And as we learn to make less mistakes and make more right choices, we move into better, less oppressive, less imprisoned realities, and into better places. I don't know how well I've been able to explain all of this, but this is coming up to an hour, so I am going to leave it here. I feel like I've explained a lot of it. I don't think many people will probably, well, I think a lot of people find the idea that we are co-creators, that we exist in these higher dimensions and stuff. I think a lot of people just think that's nonsense. Well, I think there's good evidence for it, hard evidence from physics. It's also been very much the message in my life. I don't think that I've brought out enough about the idea of God and the role that God, the Supreme Being, plays in this, in guiding you through, in helping to teach you to become um, a better creator, a better co-creator. Um, I would say that the key to that is synchronicity, that this is how God guides. He puts opportunities and things before us. He puts meaningful coincidence to point in directions that we might want to choose to go. Um, I hope above all that I've maybe started to get through this this really important message that if you are already powerful, if you are already a powerful co-creator with God, right, gaining power is not the important thing. Fighting existing structures of power, fighting evil is not the important thing. The important thing is learning to use your own creative power more effectively. Because if Julian St. Baba, if John St. Julian Baba, or if David Icke, if the positive meat in their message is really correct, then you are already powerful. You are already more powerful than the reptilians or the beings that apparently control you. It's only you giving it over and doing their bidding and living a life of hate and fear and vengeance, you know, those kinds of things that actually ensnares you. You don't have to beat them, you just have to stop giving them your power and start using your power to build a world based on love and compassion and mutual respect and unity. That's what Masonry tries to teach you to do. At least that's what the Masonry that I've found, because of the way I chose to go into it and what I was looking for, has taught me. The question of whether Masonry can ever be any different to that, I think it can. I think if you went in looking for something very different, you would find something very different. And you are advised not to do that, because that very different thing you'd find would not ultimately be very pleasant for you. It would be a very nasty learning experience instead of being what has at times been a challenging and difficult learning experience. Because with the divine guidance, these events occurring, pointing, they have, you know, they have uncovered flaws in my character. They have uncovered weaknesses and mistakes. They haven't been like perpetually just, oh, what a brilliant good guy you are. Some of it's actually been quite difficult. But when you try and live your life according to the principles you're taught in Masonry, the difficulties that you encounter in life actually ultimately help you to become a better and a more loving and a kinder person, not the converse. And as you become a more loving, better, kinder person, as you promote the good, you find more of the good in your life and in the people around you. So that's it, right? There is good meat in all the ideas around the awakening and things like that, but the poison that's infested it is the idea that you are the victim of some kind of all-powerful, all-encompassing conspiracy headed by whatever. It doesn't matter what you call it. It doesn't matter if you think of it as being Jews, or you think of it as being reptilians, or you think of it as being the demiurge. It is a poisonous, disempowering idea. Thinking of yourself as a victim, especially of a victim of a very, very, very powerful force, constructs an awful reality around yourself. And I believe you have incredible creative power, and that once you start using it to create something like that, you ultimately find yourself in a hell world. Yeah.